Hello and welcome back to another episode of Futures Frame TV. I'm Elise Krozer, your host on the Inequalities channel. I'm here today with Francisco Robles. Francisco is a professor at the School of Communication and the Institute of Social Research at the University of Costa Rica. And Francisco specializes on research on elites and inequality in terms of economic and political dimensions. Welcome, Francisco.
Hi, Alice. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for being here with us. Francisco, tell me something about the particularity of inequality research in Costa Rica or in Central America.
And thank you for having this topic because, like in the majority of the cases when we discuss about inequality in Latin America, look at the specificities like in Central America. For instance, like in your program, you have discussed like in the last couple of years, let's say 2 decades, in Latin America, the inequality has been reduced if we measure inequality based on Gini index. But for instance, in the case of Costa Rica was one of the countries that this didn't happen in the last couple of years. And so this is kind of interesting. And also what we can see in Central America is we have also the countries with the biggest gap, for instance, in Panama, Honduras, or Guatemala. And it's also quite interesting to say that, for instance, that this has been like very disruptive for a country like Costa Rica, because in Costa Rica we are like very, very equal country. We used to say that
Sweden
we are
of Latin America.
Sweden of Latin America. We usually compare ourselves with Uruguay because Uruguay is the most equal country in Latin America. So we tend to think that we are also an Uruguayan country or Sweden of Latin America. But in the recent years, like the gap between the rich and the poor has increased. And now Costa Rica has one of the biggest number on Gini index. We are also working using like Piketty methodology to look at some specificities on this kind of thing. And we will be able to share some data that shows that the inequality is even bigger when we look at the individuals and not just on the households.
Yeah, that's something very common, right? That household surveys underestimate inequality. And that's a big issue in Latin America where inequality is very high to begin with. The news numbers from the World Income Database show that substantially underestimates inequality in most countries in Latin America. But the curiosity is exactly this counter narrative, right? That Costa Rica has an increasing inequality at a time where many other countries in the region, not all, but many other countries in the region saw inequality decreasing, at least according to these measures, like the Gini coefficient of household surveys. Why do you think this is the case?
Well, there will be some at least different kind of explanations, but let me start saying like that for Costa Rica, this is, like disruptive, because if you see like the statistics from CEPAL or from World Bank, you will see like El Salvador has a lower Gini than Costa Rica. And for Costa Rica, this is, whoa, like we cannot be like El Salvador or even worse than El Salvador. But there has been a lot of discussion, like in the majority of the cases, there is a gap between the public salaries and the private salaries. But that is one of the problems related with the household surveys, because, like we are not getting into details about other sources of income. We are just looking at the salaries of the people. So there is this kind of relation between the salaries between public and private salaries. Also because in here, the informal sector represents around like 40%. But also it has been related with the economic model. There has been lots of discussion in the last 3 decades that this kind of model that was like promoted in Costa Rica, but also in the rest of the countries of Latin America, that trickle-down economics doesn't work anymore. So we depend on specifically on 2 main sectors: technological manufacture, depending on especially transnational corporations who hire like high-level educated people, but those economies or those multinational companies are not necessarily related with the rest of the economy. And then also we have the tourism industry. Like we have been one of the most popular countries in terms of tourism, but if you see like the most popular areas in Costa Rica, like the coast area, Guanacaste, for instance, the Northern Pacific, is also one of the most unequal, but one of the most poorest country. So the most poorest area of the countries, and there is this discussion that the economic model is not a trickle down in terms of the benefit for the rest of the population. And also there is also one thing that the role of elites, like the elites have been in control to some extent of the government, or at least shaping the policies that the government have promoted in the last 40 years, but also because they have been captured the media. So the majority of debates, for instance, a couple of years ago, there was this debate up in terms of fiscal reform or tax reform, but the frame of discussion was like no discussion on income or wealth tax, but more on value-added taxes. So in terms of like how the country has the model, it has been like very influenced by the elites in the last couple of years.
It's interesting that you say that the model stopped working, right? Because a couple of years ago, Costa Rica was, as you say, the example, at least in the Central American region, for a country that is a lot less unequal, let's say, than all the other countries, the other 6 countries in the Central American part. And it was famous for having almost universal pension schemes and lots of progressive programs, etc. Do you think that the fact that now this trend is reversed relates to negligence? So to say kind of we were comfortable at this position and we think we're stay like that? Or is there a driving force, a more active driving force behind this dynamic?
First, I would like to say like the model is still working and working very well. But the thing is that the model is working just for a few people. So Costa Rica has been called like the Latin American Silicon Valley, for instance. So like we are very exceptional on all the terms. So we have been called the Latin American Silicon Valley, but also it reflects that this problem related, like for instance, we have some sectors that are working very well, like the tourist industry or the service sectors industry, but for the rest of the people, this is not working. For instance, for farms or for people not into the formal economy. So I think there has been like this discussion, like in Chile, like Chile is the model of Latin America in terms of economic development, but in on the underground there are some forces that are not working related to this economic growth. And one of the problems in Costa Rica is, so for instance, in the last election, we had this very unusual like debate or presidential elections where we almost elected, let's say, a Costa Rican Trump or a Costa Rican Bolsonaro. And one of the main issues were like why the peripheral areas of the country are trying like to elect this other kind of Trump because they have been excluded of the model. So in the last weeks, let's say September and the beginning of October, there have been lots of social protests around the country, especially in the peripheral area, because those are the areas that have been hit more heavily by the consequences of the COVID, and also because in terms of like development, these areas have been not included into the discussion of the model of Costa Rica. It has been like this very like center periphery dilemma in the case of Costa Rica. So the development have been focused on specific areas of the Gran Area Metropolitana, of the central area, but meanwhile the rest of the country have been left behind.
So it's like an enclave thing almost. You have these clusters of excellence, let's say, and then the rest of the country is not benefiting to the same degree from this success of your Swedish Silicon Valley parts.
Yeah, because like we have been called the Silicon Valley, but also we have these big areas of monocrops, like pineapple, banana. So, but those are sectors where labor force are extremely, let's say, not well paid. So there is, like we export like most of the pineapples that are eaten in Europe or United States, but in here the salaries and the working conditions of the workers are the worst, or even the worst. And also this is related with the environment pollution. So the areas or the neighborhoods very close to these monocrops plantations are dealing with health problems related with this products. So we have this problem like with big tech corporations at the center of the country, but also with these big also multinationals who produce monocrops around the world.
Yeah, we see that Costa Rica, and despite being such a small country comparatively, is a country of superlatives, of big comparisons. But you said that you almost elected populists at the likes of Trump or Bolsonaro. What was the actual result in the end?
Well, it was like very interesting election, to say the least. So we elect like the kind of center left party that is called Action Citizenship Party. At the beginning they like went for a consensus government, so they brought people from the traditional parties, from like Liberation National Party and Social Christian Party, and even one person from the left. But at the end, the dynamics of the government turned to the right, or to the center right. So in the last couple of years, this government has been into office for 2 years, and there has been lots of critics of especially social movements and also university, because most of the agenda of this government has been very pro-business friendly agenda, and there has been lots of confrontation with social movements, especially unions from the public sectors, who have been like rejecting most policies of the government.
Considering that Costa Rica is a quite small country and that you do research that maybe exposes powerful individuals, do you think there is a specificity to small country research when it comes to investigating power, in terms of access to data and all these questions?
Yeah, and I can tell you about my own experience. It has been very difficult, but also for researchers, not just in Costa Rica, but also in Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and Nicaragua. I can say that in Costa Rica, studying like elites is not easy task, because it's very difficult. Well, not just in Costa Rica, but in the region, it's very difficult to access to these people. But at least in here, we have some like respect for the rule of law. But I have known cases of people in Honduras and in Guatemala that they have fled the country because they have been like threatened with physical harm in Guatemala or in Honduras, or for instance, in Honduras there have been like a couple of books or papers who have been written anonymously, because the people they don't feel safe to talk about like the relationship between elites, drug cartels, and the military. So that's a big problem in Central America. What I have found in my doctoral research was like I had kind of some like easy access because I was coming from outside. I present myself as a student at the University of Berlin, so I got some like more open doors. But if you are like Central American studying elites, you will find lots of problems or doors closed that will like impede or like restrict your research on this topic.
Yeah, clearly, if you're threatened with even physical violence or harm, it's not probably a topic that you would choose to investigate very carelessly, right? So considering, the other side of this same coin, considering this interaction between different powerful actors like government and crime organizations, etc., how do you think this reflects on the life of normal people, not researchers? Do they feel this interaction as well, or are they oblivious to it because nobody researches it, or what happens there?
Well, I think you have to go outside your house to feel and experience inequality in the whole Central America. Especially, like the ones the people who are migrating, they are migrating because they have been excluded from the model, but also because the cities are being designed in order to keep people distance. Like the poor has to be in this part of the country, or this part of the city, and the rich people has to be in this part of the city. So it's quite like Central America, Latin America in general. Also, a discussion about the elites has been like replaced by poverty. So we are kind of an experts, or governments are also experts, or university are experts on poverty. We know who they are, where do they live, how much income do they have. But this has been also a political decision. We have been focusing on just poverty and poor people, but not on the other side of the coin, on the rich. So this is a challenge that we are facing in Central America. But I'm pretty sure there is still people outside who are like studying, especially maybe not in the academia or at the universities, but there are lots of very good examples of a news media. For instance, in Guatemala, Plaza Pública, Noma, and in El Salvador, El Faro, who have been researching on different kind of relationships between like elites, power, and political influence, for instance. In the case of Costa Rica, one of these exceptions, we have the media hasn't been focused on inequality, on elites, But this is not the case, for instance, in Nicaragua. You have also interesting online media like El Confidencial in Nicaragua or Con Criterio in Honduras, who have been like researching on these kind of problematic relationships.
Yeah, I mean, the case of El Faro is probably paradigmatic there, which is also, of course, known beyond the borders of Salvador, let's say. How do these groups or these news organizations or news think tanks or whatever you can call them, how do they protect themselves against accusations from all the different sides of power?
Yeah, in the case of El Faro, they are such an experience, because at the beginning, when they started very, when the right wing party Arena, who is the closest party to the elites in El Salvador, was in power. So they were called leftist media, so kind of fake media. Then leftists took the power in 2009. They were called by the government like a right wing party. And now they have been threatened very hard by the President Bukele because they have been questioned like actions and policies and business that have been related to this administration. I think they have been survived because they have been like protected by the international community, especially NGOs, but also they have been protected by their own work because they have been working so hard. And for instance, if you are looking to try to understand El Salvador or also understand the role of elites, you have to go to El Faro and find all the reports they have written in the recent years. And that's kind of a good part if you are doing research because you also have some access to different sources of information. In El Salvador, also you have the case of Guatemala, for instance, Plaza Pública. Plaza Pública is another media that is related to Universidad Rafael Landívar. So media or critical media, and they have been like trying to survive with different kind of relationships. In the case of Guatemala, they have been like related to universities, or in the case of El Salvador, they have been protected by the international community.
In this really very complex and difficult environment, how do you choose to work on a topic like that?
I choose to study like elites and power in Central America because nobody was doing this. Well, I mean, like there were people studying this, but like we can count with our fingers how many people were working on elites in Central America. Alexander Segovia in 2005, Eric de Wool and her colleagues in 2014, but there were like very few studies. And then you can see in the case of Alex Segovia, he was doing this study for the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, and in the case of Benedict Bull, they were working on funds from Oslo University. So there are not lots of research funded by public universities or public funds in Central America. So why did I choose this? It was because I think there is a problem on poverty, because in the last, let's say, 30 years, we have been studying poverty. We are kind of experts, but nothing has changed. In my point of view, part of the problems of the Central America are related to the role of elites and how do they control institutions, how do they shape policies, and how do they frame or cover information in the media. So it's kind of like a personal task.
What do you think would be helpful in order to make research on these issues more accessible?
One of the things, like, we need more public data in Central America. At least in Costa Rica, we have very interesting or very good public sources of information. But in the case of the rest of the countries of Central America, you have to go to an office and knock on the door, ask for the right person. So they give tons of papers. So you have to write it down the papers and then go back to your computer. So one of the challenges is to have public data, but also we need support from the public universities, because like there has been this also inside of the universities, this kind of like movement, like these are topics that we shouldn't be discussing because these are like very problematic topics. So like in Costa Rica, we have this discussion on like it's better not to discuss this because these will have consequences on the budget of the universities. So these are discussions that we were not supposed to have. So public university support is very needed in these kind of discussions.
So it's kind of a taboo to talk about elites?
It's kind of, yeah, because we don't have it. Like they don't exist.
No elites exist.
No. I mean, like, it's interesting because in the media, like even the right-wing media, they discuss about political elites. But when we are talking about like economic elites, they don't exist, or they are presented like the business person of the year. But we don't discuss the role or the influence of this business person of the year on politics. But there have been changes. There have been changes, especially during the COVID. We have been seeing, like in the case of Honduras or Guatemala, the business sector has been able to capture some of the policies related to COVID responses, but not in Nicaragua or in El Salvador, because in El Salvador and Nicaragua, there have been this kind of rupture between the government and the elites. And in the case of Costa Rica, seeing is kind of some traces of collaboration between the government and the elite. So it is not like a monolithic, or it is not just one photo in the case of Central America. So we are eager to study more and more in more detail the consequences of the influence or the bargaining power of elites in the region.
In an ideal world where you don't have these threats and problems and discussions, etc., what would you like to study?
You mean instead of studying elites?
No, I mean, as an aspect of, or instead of, I mean, maybe you don't want to study elites, but maybe what aspect of elite study would be interesting if you didn't have these problems?
Well, I think one of the key research areas or more gray areas that we need to study more is about inequality with elites in terms of how do they perceive inequality. You are an expert on this, on this topic, but we don't have any of this kind of information in Central America. So we have some perceptions and we have some information that we can extract from news, but we don't have what do they think. So I think it's quite interesting to have this conversation about about inequality with elites, because like one of the consequences of inequality in Central America is the increase of social violence. But different from the 80s, when the elites were kind of a target from the violence. Nowadays, they are not part of these dynamics of social violence. So because the social violence is related among like especially middle classes and poor classes. So I would like to have an idea or a discussion with these people of how do they perceive violence, what can be some solutions they are willing to propose, or what are the views on the future of Central America and their views on the future of poverty reduction and equality reduction.
Yeah, in the meantime, while we don't know what they think, we hope that you will be able to study that in the future. But in the meantime, what is your image of the future of Costa Rica and the region?
It is not very positive. Last year, I wrote this kind of a paper on like we need an Esquipulas the third. Like Esquipulas the third was this peace agreement that was kind of that helped to sign the peace in El Salvador and Guatemala. And at that time, I was very worried because literature, for instance, Angelica Redberg, this great professor from Colombia, she has been studying the role of business elites in peace process, and she has this idea that in order to involve business elites into peace process or more redistributive policies, you need three ingredients: greed, so they will be willing to participate; need, so they will find new resources in these new peaceful processes or new redistributive policies in order to be part of them. And I don't remember the third one, but it was related with the will, with the willingness of these elites of taking part of this process. And I have not seen this kind of willingness of elites to participate. We have seen like that in the majority of the countries of Central America, part of the elites groups are taking part of political parties, or they are even like building their own parties in like Macri in Argentina or Piñera in Chile. But those are not like political parties to change, but in more on the perspective of keeping the status quo like it is right now.
Yeah, that's definitely not very bright picture. To lighten up a little bit, I want to refer to your own podcast. You have a podcast that's called El Zapato Aprieta, where the shoe hurts, putting the finger on the wound, so to speak. That's what it's called. And you have a very pretty question in your podcast about what gives you hope. And I'd like to ask you that as well. What gives you hope?
Well, that's a good question. I haven't never been asked. People around the world, like family, and because we have been maybe this is just in the academia. We have to read a lot, and we have this very negative picture of the world very in the most of the time. But when I talk to my friends, they have another picture, or maybe they have the same picture, but when we interact with other people, we can see that the future is not so dark. So maybe the solutions are not the big ones, but the smallest one related to the people that surround us.
That is very beautiful, and we're coming to a close with this positive note. Is there anything you'd like to add on inequality and elites, or do we rather keep it?
No, thank you very much, and thank you for promoting us, our podcast also, that you can find it in, but it's in Spanish, platform of your preference. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for bringing the inequality discussion on Central America to your podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Francisco, for painting us this, well, challenging picture of how it is to research inequalities in Central America. In general, it's not something that is very delightful to look at the problems of the world on a daily basis. But if it's under those especially challenging circumstances as the ones researchers face in Central America, of course, that's an additional challenge to the normal problems of doing research on difficult topics, right? So we of course wish you the very best, and we support your great research on elites in or power in Central America and in Costa Rica, and we hope that you'll be able to do all these interesting studies in the future. Thank you for sharing your story with us, and thank you all for watching another episode of Dreams TV. If you like these topics or if you want to learn more, please join us again next Saturday for another episode. I'm Alice Krozer, your host on the Inequalities channel, and I hope you have a good day. See you soon. Bye-bye.